Hello and welcome to this webcast. My name's Kris Oldland. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Field Service News, and I'm very pleased to be joined today by John Hunt, Managing Director for EMEA with Astea. And today John and I are going to be taking a deep dive into some research analysis, looking at the key trends amongst service-centric manufacturers that emerged from a recent research project that Astea undertook with our good friends WBR.
Okay, so John, let's have a look at the first pieces of these data that I've pulled out then, because there's some really great insights across the whole report. This was the one that leapt out at me, and I had to put it right at the front here. 37% of organisations that were in the response set of the survey stated that they're mostly or entirely product sales driven, but 75% claim that service revenue has actually increased over the last 5 years, and 45% are stating that revenue, we're talking about product revenue. Now, the first thought that came into my mind is this might be indicative that we're very much starting to move into a world of servitization, advanced services, things that we've been talking a lot about at Field Service News for the last couple of years. And that seems to be happening at a greater speed now. I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
I believe that statistically, I think we've reached the tipping point. Anecdotally, and just based on the profile of the opportunities that we're currently engaged on with our prospective clients and some of our existing clients, especially in the last year, it tells me the same. More and more manufacturers of products are either building or transforming their own services model, and that remains surprisingly manual in a lot of areas, or they're owning that services opportunity, and they're outsourcing it to third parties that specialize in that service models. Now, early adopters, they're thriving in the top quartile of revenue, profit, customer loyalty, and they're continuing to improve and fine-tune their services model, or their partners are fine-tuning their services model. I guess I could use the analogy, if they were a Formula One racing team, they're fine-tuning their car. They're repetitively finding themselves in a pole position, and they're just continuing to improve on how they're finishing each and every race, winning a lot of those races. The fast followers, their cars are on the tracks. They're making those adjustments to win more and more of those races. And then you got the laggards. And some of those folks are just now designing their car. It's still in the garage, not even on the track. And I'm frankly concerned for some of those laggards given how far ahead the competition is.
And the competitive advantage that we're seeing companies that are embracing advanced services, like you mentioned, not just greater profitability, not greater efficiencies, but it's also that stickiness. And I still, as somebody who writes for a living, I really need to try and find a better word than stickiness, but it's the one that comes to me, is that customer loyalty, isn't it? I mean, one thing I thought would be quite interesting to get your insight on, given the world that you've operated in, is what can these manufacturers learn from the IT companies that perhaps have been down this journey previously? You know, the software as a service model. We're now at everything as a service, aren't we? But SaaS was the big thing. Are there learnings that manufacturers can take from that approach? I mean, my mind thinks back to how Microsoft was so reluctant, for example, to step into that world and kind of drag kicking and screaming. And now we've fully embraced it, but perhaps could have gone the way of a Kodak at one point where they weren't prepared to adapt. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, so I think particularly in the last 2 to 3 years in the EMEA marketplace, there was still a reticence on many of our prospective clients' part, and many companies that just provide software solutions in general, regardless of how they deliver those. There was a reticence of the customers in this region to adopt software as a service. And I think there's a few things that have changed, and there's in the software world, and I think there's a lot of applicability to the manufacturing world and the service of those products. So the combination of data security, concerns that have been alleviated much in the last 2 to 3 years, availability of stable, available, high-performance solutions, and thirdly, the ubiquitous access of bandwidth, both at the office, at your customers' facilities, whether that be a business or a consumer, and the mobile field engineer. Those three things have really transformed in this region in the last 3 years to make it a widely adopted concept, software as a service versus pure software. And that playing field has very much been evened over the last several years too. Not just the mega household brands that everybody's familiar with, but many of the smaller companies are all able to deliver their software and the software as a service model now. And I think there's a lot of parallels to the manufacturing world and the servicing of those products. Data security, ubiquitous bandwidth at the office, at the client's facilities, or at the customer's or the consumer's home, and with a mobile field engineer, security, and lots of solution providers have various parts of that solution that they're able to offer in a software as a service, just like Astea does. And then you've got companies like Astea that offer the entire service lifecycle, the opportunity for service providers to adopt our solutions in a software as a service model across the entire suite, the entire umbrella of what we offer.
Yeah, it's interesting because it feels that almost a lot of the obstacles, especially towards software as a service and then companies moving towards connected field service and this thought process that comes with servitization, a lot of the barriers, it feels like what were barriers 3 years ago, we were just pushing against open doors, like you say, ubiquitousness of various connectivity. You know, the concepts around cloud security that have just disappeared because it was new, but we didn't really understand it. And it was a case that we put forward quite a lot of, look, a company like Azure or Amazon it's far greater danger for them as a cloud provider to have a security weakness, and they've got bigger pockets than any company. Even your GEs of the world haven't got as big pockets as your Amazons and your Microsofts in terms of providing cloud security. So it's interesting you reference that because it does feel that we've hit that tipping point. Looking at these numbers here, you know, the decline in product revenue, the increase in service revenue, am I perhaps egging the pudding too much? Is it a bit too hyperbolic to say that companies that don't embrace a service-centric revenue model now leave themselves open to complete competitive disadvantage? Those laggards, are they really kind of in quite a bit of danger unless they kind of start focusing on service-centric revenues?
Well, yeah, I think so. To go back to my other analogy, I wonder if some of those companies will even finish the race.
Yeah.
I think it's very challenging for these manufacturers to find and develop and retain the right talent to build their products in a very differentiated way in the first place. Add on top of that the challenge to do the same with servicing those products and developing those competencies. It is an incredibly intricate skill set that's required to do that, to build customer loyalty and a fan base of raving fans, not just people that are accepting of the product, but also accepting of the service and what I like to call the extra mile.
Yes.
So you've built a product, you've differentiated yourselves, you've enabled that product to be used, you've delivered that product to the business or the consumer, and that extra mile of what happens after they've got the product, and delivering a wondrously delightful experience for that customer, even when dealing with the service of that product, is just an incredibly challenging situation. So again, those companies that aren't even on the track and are still building the cars, I think they're going to have a hard time catching up.
I think as well, it's a mindset thing as well, which is, especially for a lot of more traditional manufacturers, it's that mindset of even the word after sales, you know, aftermarket. You know, it's ingrained that the product is what we do. That's the main thing. There's the focus. We get that beautiful, and it's this afterthought of the service, and that dichotomy being flipped upside down a little bit now to design the product for the ongoing service and to continue that journey and that experience, as you say, is a tricky mindset for companies to get. But I think it is quite important they do so. This kind of leads me on to something I've been thinking about a wee while, and again, I think the stats kind of would indicate this. There's a bit of a need for service to become much more integrated in the whole business discussion, not just that afterthought anymore. Are you seeing this with some of the companies that you're working with, some of the companies that you're speaking to that are coming to you looking for new solutions? Because I imagine that's happening a lot at the moment as well. Companies that perhaps are suddenly switched onto service coming to you saying, well John, how do we make this happen? Are they starting to integrate the conversations between product and R&D and sales and bring service into that bigger picture as well? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think and I may be getting ahead of some of our talking points here, but as we look at more and more companies with declining product revenues and increasing service revenues, it's happening for a reason. Because those early adopters are finding that that's where they're getting the majority of their value. Previously, the service of the products was the icing on the cake.
Exactly.
And more, the servicing of the product is the cake, and the product just happens to be the icing on the cake.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And not only delivering a wondrously delightful customer experience when they buy that product, but again, I keep referring to what I think of as that extra mile.
Yeah.
After they bought that product, in those years that they're going to continue to use that product, what is their experience like? And it's as early adopters know, and as fast followers will soon find out, there are no traffic jams along the extra mile.
Yeah.
And that's where they're really pulling ahead more and more.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Well, one last quick one on that. From a platform perspective and from a business ecosystem in terms of the solutions, you mentioned Astea can offer both options there in terms of being the end-to-end platform, which we're starting to see more and more companies kind of following that footstep as well. But I know you guys have had that for a very long time, but also there's the kind of the best of breed elements. Is it essential for any company that's trying to approach this way of thinking that the data flows seamlessly from the ERP to the CRM to the FSM solutions? I mean, we've talked a lot in the past of Field Service News about breaking down these data silos. I mean, has that become pivotal now for companies to move forward and be able to kind of achieve these kind of 360-degree customer views? Don't want to use a hackneyed phrase. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, it completely is, especially if you data is completely useless unless it's converted into information, which then can be converted into actionable insights, ideally coupled with recommendations on which direction for an organization to take. But you take that ubiquitous access to everybody that touches the product, whether it be the buyer, the company that's servicing it, whether it be the company that produced it or a third party, or that buyer after the sale that's seeking service. Couple that with the Internet of Things, where those devices are now actually producing copious amounts of data amongst an emerging IoT base where there are no standard communication protocols established yet.
Yeah.
You got to take lots of data points from your back office workers providing service, building the products, providing the service, your mobile field engineers that are interacting with the consumers, your customer ambassadors that are interacting with the consumers or the business-to-business customer, taking all of that data and combining it into information and allowing it to be converted to actionable insights. It's an incredible challenge, but again, those early adopters and fast followers are well on the way.
Yeah.
And you take data security, bandwidth, computing power. The time is now.
Yeah. It's fascinating. I remember back in the many misty days of time when I was a student, writing about this kind of stuff and talking about how Moore's law was incredibly still relevant now today, and we're almost just about starting to see it, but kind of move away. But it's moved into a conversation around bandwidth. It's increasing every 18 months, and it's almost doubling every 18 months. I mean, we talk now these days about 30, 50 gig internet speeds as something that's the norm. It wasn't that long ago that you were paying a premium for a meg. It's incredible how it's evolved. So John, let's have a look at another of the statistics that leapt out at me from the report, and that was that the vast majority of organisations, 84%, it's a huge chunk there, are claiming that managing evolving customer expectations is amongst their biggest challenges across the next year or so. Obviously, that's kind of the mirror of what we were just talking about. The opportunities are huge in terms of what can be achieved, but powered by emerging technologies like IoT, driven forward by better infrastructure, improving bandwidth speeds and CPU processing, etc. The flip side of that, of course, is our customers are always on that journey with us, and they also have access to greater tools. Social media being a huge one, for example. It's so easy for a customer that's displeased to suddenly voice that displeasure an awful long way these days. And so we kind of, at Field Service News, we talked about things like mobile, IoT and social, and how they've been leveraged by field service companies to improve service delivery. But that double-edged sword with customers being more empowered and informed, it seems it's got to be a critical point for consideration now for service companies. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I read a great quote the other day by a woman named Maya Angelou.
Okay.
And I think this really sums it up well. People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel.
Yeah, it's a great quote. Yeah.
I think it's really powerful and really sets apart the difference between just pure delivering a customer satisfaction moment versus delivering a customer experience.
Yeah.
And I happen to have a fantastic case study that's very near and dear to my heart. And it's a pretty simple case study, but one that's very near and dear to my heart and involves my mom.
Okay.
So my mom recently had to call a plumber
Okay.
to replace a faucet. And my mother lives in Atlanta. She's 4,200 miles away from where I live here in London. And I talked to her on a regular basis, and I heard for just a few seconds that the plumber arrived on time and repaired the faucet in 10 minutes. I then spent 5 to 10 minutes talking about how that plumber made my mother feel, which was fantastic.
Excellent, yeah.
That plumber had the right information at the right time and the right parts, arrived on time, and installed that faucet within minutes. He had extra time. He asked my mother how she felt, how she was doing. She happened to mention that she had a light fixture in her ceiling that she needed a light bulb replaced in. He was not an electrician, but he took the time to replace a light bulb.
Yeah.
You better believe that plumbing company now has a very fiercely loyal customer.
Absolutely.
My mom. You better believe that, and I also happen to know that plumber's name, which is Peter. I guess to protect the innocent, I won't mention his last name, but Peter the plumber is now going to get requested every single time there's a call out to my mother's home, right? And every other service company that she does business with, regardless of what they do, whether it's HVAC, repairing a television, repairing a refrigerator, the washing machine, every single other service provider will be compared to Peter the plumber. I've nicknamed him St. Peter the plumber.
St. Peter the plumber. St. Peter of plumbing.
Right.
No, it's absolutely true. There's a couple of points that kind of leap out on that. I think we live in a world today where we don't compete with those companies in our nearest competitive sphere.
Sure.
We compete with the best service experience ever. So it's not just, like you say, it's not just the plumbing. It's if somebody comes around to install pay TV for your mum, or if somebody comes around to, some maintenance work in the garden or something, that expectation level is there, and everyone needs to be hit by it. There's a great quote I'm very fond of, is a rising tide lifts all boats, and we're seeing that in the service world. So that's really interesting. The other thing that I just reflect on that as well is, as we move into a world of digitalization, as we move into a world of chatbots and omni-channel contact centers, etc., it may not necessarily be that we have any actual interaction with a person until the service engineer comes out.
Sure.
And so the importance of the role of the field service engineer to be able to tick all those boxes, and obviously kind of arrive, be courteous and all of that, it's suddenly risen up because they've become the face of the organisation themselves now. It's very possible, maybe not in this instance, but it's very possible that appointment could have been scheduled via a mobile app, or it could have been just done online, and there's very little interaction there. So St. Peter of plumbing has an awful lot of weight on his shoulders, but he's done a great job.
Sure.
It's interesting as well. You touched on the difference between customer satisfaction and customer experience. And those terms are I still see them being a little bit used interchangeably, but do you think that customer experience is just the evolution of what we've been focusing on with CSAT for so long, or is it another layer above and companies need to kind of understand that satisfaction isn't enough, it's experience is more important now? And it's I suppose it's a bit more encompassing, isn't it? All encompassing. It's thinking about from a little bit reflecting what you're saying about the product. It's reflecting from the point of sale right through to the lifespan of the customer at every single touch point. You need to make sure that they feel like your mother felt with this plumbing company.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, as all these manufacturers of products understand, it takes months to acquire a customer.
Yeah.
It can take seconds to lose a customer with one bad service experience during that extra mile. So after that product is put in use, whether it be in an office or at the consumer's home, it takes seconds to lose that customer. I go back to that quote that quote from Maya Angelou was so impactful to me. It literally, I think, will drive how I influence my colleagues and teams to service our customers. It's a very powerful statement. I'm not going to remember what you said, what you did, but I will absolutely forever remember how you made me feel.
Yeah.
And these product manufacturers, that initial feeling a customer gets when they purchase that product is one thing, but those years and years of use and how you make them feel during interactions with your organization or your outsourced service provider's organization, how you made them feel getting service is it's essential.
There's even engendering customer loyalty is great, and it makes the engineer feel brilliant, and it's a win-win everywhere. There's also the very simple economic argument. I think the statistic is 6 times easier to retain a customer and upsell than it is to gain a new customer. It's something that I've always wondered why we haven't focused on it quite so much, when the statistics have overwhelmingly been there that it's easier to hold on to a customer than it is to generate new. So that's a really interesting kind of, well, it's a great anecdote for a start. I've now got a vision of St. Peter the plumber in my head, so that's going to stay with me. That's for sure. Okay, so one of the things that came to me as well, talking about aims and goals for the companies and the service companies that were in the survey. Respondents' most cited biggest goal for 2018 to 2019 is increasing innovation, agility, and internal resources to support new offerings. Now, obviously, that's great news for field service delivery. It's great news for us talking about it. It's great news for you as a provider to the market. But often those of us that are close to the coalface, the kind of guys that I'll catch up with at the various conferences that I'll be at, one thing that anecdotally comes through is they see the need to kind of for investment in tools like Astea's platform, etc. But then they need to give advice further up to those in the higher echelons, and it's becoming less prevalent. Service has certainly got more of a voice on the executive board, but it's perhaps we're talking about those 20% that are in the early adopters. There's still an awful lot of companies where service is seen as a little bit of a dark art, seen as something that's kind of a necessary evil that people don't really get in the upper boards and the finance and the procurement sides. How should service directors listening to this now, have you got any advice for them on how best to build the argument when they're speaking to the powers that be, when they're speaking to the CFOs and the CEOs, to say, we need this. This is, we don't want to be the laggard. We don't want to be the guys with the car still in the garage when everyone else is whizzing around the track. What advice would you give them on that, John?
Yeah, and this might, I hope this doesn't appeal to too small a segment of our audience here, but Kris, have you ever seen the game show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
We're in Britain. It was one of our finest exports. So yeah.
Yeah. So Kris, as a United States citizen and as a resident here now of the UK for well over 5 years, the Americans also we like to steal television shows and ideas. So it's also a very popular show in the States. I know we got a wide audience here, and I think it's been exported elsewhere. But there's a concept in Who Wants to Be a Millionaire called phone a friend.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. So you, as a contestant, you're on the show. You're very smart in a lot of ways, right? And as a service director, very smart in the provision of service. However, those contestants have the ability to phone a friend, and they pick those friends based on certain topics they might think come up, right? So my best recommendation to a services director is phone a friend. Phone a friend like Astea that has done this for nearly 40 years. Next year will be our 40-year anniversary. That can assist in understanding what your organization's biggest problems are, whether that be related to service or not at present, but eventually the service of that product will be the biggest problem. Right? And I would contend that for manufacturers, it will be the biggest problem with the organization. If it already isn't, it will be within the next several years, given the way the market is going. And more advanced services solutions, and as the other parts that are already well automated on the factory floor with ERP systems, etc., become even more mature and get upgraded, this will be the biggest problem they have within the next few years. Phone a friend. And our perspective, such as Astea, and there are others, but phone a friend and invite them directly into the dialogue with the board.
Yeah.
Our most successful customers, services directors specifically, that have to sell this to their executive management team, they don't just simply allow us to educate them on how to do that. They bring us directly into the dialogue. We're seated at the same table with them to present our learnings in a very contextual way that makes the most sense to that board member or that executive management team member. That services director understands their business, their product, their services model the best, and companies like us understand how to optimize that services model to get to the right people and the right parts to the right place at the right time, and work with that entire ecosystem within the entire service cycle, from point of use to the service point to forward logistics, reverse logistics, the remote communications from the back office all the way out to the mobile field engineers who can work with our solutions in real time when they're connected or when they're in the basement of the building or the basement of a consumer's home with no connectivity, are still able to move fluidly through that service cycle to offer I can continue to call it a wonderfully delightful customer experience.
Sure. Yeah. No, that makes an awful lot of sense. And like I say, service touches so many different other of those, and increasingly so touches other areas of that ecosystem. Just one quick point on that. Just fast forward in that hypothetical scenario for a moment. Let's say they bring the friend in, they get the buy-in. In terms of implementation, just because you mentioned the engineers there, I kind of, again, it's a little bit anecdotal, although we did do some research on it, but it's a little bit dated now. It was a couple of years ago, where we found that companies that brought a selection of engineers to feedback during the implementation process, and obviously there's change management elements in that as well, but to actually say, well, look, this is how we will be using the tools. We found a few years back that invariably the pickup rate and the speed that these companies saw the ROI was dramatically bigger, but there was very, very few companies that were doing it. Is that something that you come across? Is it something that you advise when you go into implementation phase to get the actual end users, the guys that are going to be using the mobile tools or the dispatch tools in the back office or anything? Is that something that you bring into you advise companies to do, or is there a kind of no set the template? This is how you do it. It's got to be evolved company by company. I know I've thrown that at you. So.
Well, no, it's actually a fantastic question. And product manufacturers will appreciate this. I hope they will appreciate this. So when they develop brand new products or extensions of their products, I'm sure that the vast majority of them take great advantage of focus groups. Yeah. With their end customers going to buy the product. It's no different than the employees that will use an automated solution that will help them service the product. You've got to understand what drives that focus group, what motivates that focus group, and want that focus group to pull.
Yes.
Just like the business-to-business customer or the consumer, they want demand to pull the product. You can't force it upon them.
Yeah.
The same thing happens with your internal customers who are the back office users, the dispatchers, the schedulers, the people in logistics, the people in the repair depot, and the mobile field engineers are most important because they make up the vast majority of the service ecosystem. They are that point that can lose a customer in second, or if they're St. Peter the plumber, can help you gain a customer for life. So what better group to advise you on what works and what does not work in that group, have them be a part of the mission, and have them pull the adoption of that solution. These people want nothing more than to be able to do their job easily and effectively, and at the end of the day, delight a human being with whom they're interacting. There's no better feeling than delighting a human that you're working with on having a great experience. And on the flip side, at least to me, there's nothing more embarrassing than not doing a great job with the customer. And even more frustrating in today's day and age, in November of 2018, when technology actually inhibits or limits your ability to do that. That shouldn't be the case. There are enough solutions out there provided by a number of different companies. Right? Astea happens to offer the entire service lifecycle management solution suite under one umbrella, but I know that's not for everybody. There are enough companies present in this world now where technology should never be an inhibitor to the person on dispatch scheduling, logistics and the repair depot, and particularly the field engineer, where it limits them. I think it's inexcusable in today's day and age when that can happen. Yeah.
Excellent. No, I appreciate that. It's one of those that it just seems like such an obvious no-brainer. Yet it always amazes me how few companies still do it. It's a drum we've banged for a while. I'm hoping perhaps we'll be doing some more research on that, and I'll squeeze that question in again, because I think it's something that companies need to pay attention.
Well, yeah. To further, change management is the part of the equation that a lot of companies that are trying to transform their service organization unfortunately do forget.
Yeah.
So it illustrates the importance of not only choosing the right solution portfolio to meet the need, but the right partner that can help with that change management journey with all of those people in the service ecosystem, particularly the mobile field engineer, companies that have had years and dozens of years, decades of experience in having done so. That is, in some cases, I think it's most of the battle.
Yeah.
To help an organization with that change management, that change management transformational component, putting the solution into use, getting the end users to pull it and want to use it, and almost demand it from the organization, and really take advantage of all the capabilities to use it and apply that wonderfully delightful customer experience.
Fantastic. And talking of change management, perhaps there's been no bigger change in how service is being delivered than the impact of the Internet of Things. Beautiful segue across there. And IoT is huge. It's. I remember writing about the Internet of Things a couple of years back, 4 or 5 years ago, and doing a comparison between IoT and mobile. And a lot of people say, well, mobile, IoT is going to revolutionize field service like mobile did. And I said, well, I think it's going to be bigger. And my reasoning for that was, mobile just improved everything that we were doing, but it didn't replace the processes particularly. IoT is going to change, and it is changing the way we think about service delivery. We've talked about servitization and advanced services. It's the core of those. But even just shifting towards proactive, preventative maintenance, IoT is massive. And I've been kind of a big proponent of the importance of IoT for some time now in the field service sector. So it's really interesting, the data that came out here. 79% of organizations are now using IoT applications or IoT platforms to support technology as a service for industrial equipment. 45% of organizations have at least a quarter, 25% or more of their installed assets IoT enabled. That's some really, if you think of the time span on that, this is happening at a rapid pace. Do these numbers line up with, I'll put this question to you in two ways, if I may. Do these numbers line up with what you would have expected? Let's say if we were having this conversation 5 years ago, do they line up with what you would have predicted then? And do they line up with what you're seeing now today as you're speaking with service companies more and more, talking about IoT?
Gosh, if you'd asked me this question 5 years ago in the service world, how would I have thought about that? I think I would have told you that we might actually have been a little bit further behind where we are today, just based on the level of adoption we were seeing with concepts like software as a service because of bandwidth at the time and the ubiquitous access of bandwidth. Again, not just in an office, but in a consumer's home and in the field in very remote locations, which I'm not sure the infrastructure was prepared for 5 years ago. But maybe even more so, the concerns around data security. There's one thing for me to allow, or for companies to allow customers, it's one thing for companies to allow software providers to host their very sensitive data and information in an environment and not completely control it. 5 years ago, the world wasn't quite ready for that as much as they are today.
Yeah.
And I think that same obvious concern applies to the Internet of Things, where I've got devices in an office setting or in a consumer's home that are communicating what a lot of people would consider very sensitive information. So 5 years ago, I think we probably I would have said we would be a little bit further behind where we are today, just because of those primary barriers.
Yep.
Where do I see it going in the future? I think because of that software as a service transformation that we've seen, where it's now much more the norm statistically and anecdotally based on what I can observe. I think the same thing will happen with the Internet of Things, especially because we are now able to, organizations like Astea are now able to compute a return on investment, not just on what happens with that device that's out in the field, but what happens when those many devices out in the field, sometimes on different platforms and one of our customers' installation spaces, which may have been grown organically on their own, or if they're large companies like many of our customers are, who have grown inorganically through acquisitions, which might acquire a competitor who had a different IoT platform. So suddenly I've got two different IoT platforms that I'm expected to take all that data and convert them into information and then feed something that gives me an actionable insight and can even make recommendations, right? A big challenge for our customers. And we're starting to see a big return on investment. I think Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, put it really well, which is the best kind of service is I don't have to call anyone. I don't have to talk to anyone. It just works.
Yeah.
And the same thing with IoT that provides that great actionable information, actionable insights based on the information that enables me to dispatch a field engineer and a part in a predictive way before it fails, and to delight my customer that says, today I'm here at your facility. I will have warned them in advance, but I'm going to come to your facility to replace this device that's likely to fail in the next month and prevent a critical downtime or just a major inconvenience. And that's what these IoT devices are able to do. And I think customers more and more are able to prove a very significant return on investment because of those things. And taking human beings out of the equation where they're not necessary and enabling organizations to invest more and more in the training and development of their staff, whether it be those customer ambassadors in the end of the equation and that extra mile of the service interaction, or even the back office dispatch workers, schedulers, etc., to enable them to develop more and more of their talents on the human side of the equation and take some of these things that can be automated that don't require human intervention. Just take it completely out of the equation and streamline it.
Well, this is where all of these these streams are kind of coming together as well, because we're talking about experience, and we talk about the work-life balance of the engineer and the engineer wanting to be there to delight people. There is a very fundamental makeup, the way I see it, of what a service engineer is, what attracts people to that role. There's a degree of autonomy, there's a desire to be a problem solver, and there's a desire to be the superhero, is how I often phrase it. An awful lot of field service engineers, I feel, should be walking out with their pants on the outside of their trousers. That's perhaps a British way of phrasing it, but the class, a cape around the neck, and it's kind of what IoT is enabling, isn't it? Because it's taken away. And again, we talk about automation an awful lot, but these things are all these streams all seem to be coming together to this perfect point where it's taken away the mundane. It's like mobile before, as I kind of touched on, but mobile took away the necessity for endless paperwork and reporting that engineers, that's not really, there may be a few guys out there, but I would wager a large percentage of engineers don't like the admin side of their job, and so embrace mobile. It's the same as IoT. They're now they can go in and they can understand proactively what the issue is. They can fix it before it's been an issue. It's a win-win for everyone. So I think that IoT is going to be a fundamental part of the future. I absolutely agree with you on that. Okay, so one of the questions that was put to the respondents was, among the following options, which is your biggest goal for the remainder of this year and looking forward to next? I wanted to bring all of these statistics out here because I think this is hugely valuable insight for anyone that's listening in on this, any service directors watching this, to be able to see what their peers are doing. So let's just have a little look through these. So the largest percentage, 28%, so just over a quarter, as we mentioned earlier, we're looking to increase innovation, agility, and put internal resources to support new service offerings. Just under a quarter, 24%, we're looking to carry out digital transformation, specifically to outpace their competition. So I'll come back to that one with you, John, because I think that's quite an interesting viewpoint there. A fifth, 20%, will looking to improve the technology they have to provide new service offerings. And I think that could possibly be linked back towards these new service revenue strategies as well. These revenue strategies are being driven by service-centric thinking. 16% are meeting evolving customer expectations with new innovative service offerings. Again, it's that point that we touched on, that double-edged sword of the tools that we have empowering us to deliver better service, but also giving us, I don't think we've ever lived in an age where customer expectations are this high. And finally, just over a tenth, 12% of the respondents stated that their service revenue growth will catch up and offset their decline in product revenue. So there's some interesting kind of trends coming through on that. John, the one thing I thought was really interesting, obviously we've discussed the need for innovation, and we'll kind of gloss over that one because I think we've covered that in quite a lot of depth. But digital transformation, is digital transformation for you a one-hit conversation? Is it an ongoing process? It seems to be the big buzzword du jour across service organisations at the most. I thought it was really interesting. It's digital transformation to outpace the competition. What's your thoughts on digital transformation? Is it something that should be ongoing? Is it part of the continuous journey? Or is it something that companies should be looking at, right, we need to get ourselves connected, we need our assets connected on IoT, or we need mobile, or we need to move to the cloud? How do you view it?
Well, I think that it certainly is the term of the day that is thought of by many people in many different ways. So I think that one of the most important things that manufacturers can do is focus on their core competency, which is building the best product they possibly can in a very differentiated way, and enabling their staff to provide these wonderfully delightful customer experiences. And a digital transformation, asking these products companies to foster their own digital transformation, but can become quite challenging for many of them. And as I referenced before with the phone a friend analogy, there are many different companies across their entire ecosystem of what they need digitally transformed, from the factory floor all the way out to that extra mile, that they can partner with companies like Astea to help them out on that journey, to provide not only the solution, but the assistance, the justification for making the investments in the first place, but also the assistance to deliver on those investments.
Yeah, no, it's one that I've got a bit of a bugbear around, just the mindset of companies having this view of any technology being a technology for the sake of it. I think, and this kind of reflects what you said there, and also some of the earlier conversation. These things need to be kind of viewed as a complete whole, and it needs to be, the technology is there to empower the organisation to do what it does best, to hit those core competencies. The other stat here that really stood out for me as one to pick up on is improving the technology that a field service company has to provide new service offerings. I think that's a really interesting point here, because one of the things we've seen with augmented reality, for example, one of the things we're seeing with IoT, one of the things we're not seeing, I suppose is a better way of phrasing it, is the development of new service strategies, new revenue strategies. It's something that was discussed a little bit with AR, for example. Is a customer going to be paying more to have the engineer on site, or actually, if you can put them with, I'm speaking hypothetically, so maybe a couple of years down the line here, but if you can put them with a pair of smart glasses and a live engineer that's guiding their in-house engineer bit by bit, and they can get up and running within 2 hours rather than 2 days, should that have an increased value? Because let's be honest, the end customer really just wants to be up and running as quick as possible. It's the same with IoT. Should we be leveraging the fact that we can deliver preventative maintenance, that we can get out there to fix that issue before, as you were referencing earlier, before anything's gone down? Should we be thinking about that as, well, that should be a premium service? And this is something that I've been discussing a wee bit, and I'd be keen to get your thoughts on this. Does that push the boundaries of the customer experience too far by being too mercenary? And should we just be striving to deliver best service that we can, that's efficient for us and delights our customers? or should we be looking at it and saying, well, actually, this is a competitive advantage we have because we can get out to you and you can carry on business as usual. We'll still deliver a great service, or we can make sure you never go down, and we start talking about guarantees of uptime then. And this is where, again, we start to cross into the conversation around servitization. It's a big question, but I'd just be keen to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. To me, I think the most important thing is, so in this world with billions of people in it, and for these companies that are our customers, these product manufacturers that have tens of millions, if not billions, of prospective customers, I think one of the most important things they can do is appeal to, obviously, the widest proportion of their market that they possibly can with their products and how those products get serviced. So Kris and John probably have very different views of what good service means to us and a good customer experience means to us. So I think it's really important for them, for manufacturers, to build a vast array of ways to have their product service. So today, and I hate to keep going back and using the near and dear to my heart example of my mom, but one of the things my mom does before she places a service call for a treadmill that she owns, she goes on YouTube and does her own research. And she's able to get on-the-job training to repair a treadmill. This is a very smart woman, but a woman in her early 70s that a lot of people wouldn't do that. But she prefers to do it on her own. So if someone like that woman in her early 70s can go out and research how to service a treadmill on her own, use the website to figure out what the right part is, order the part, and replace it on her own, why wouldn't a company want to offer her the ability to do that? On the flip side, a person like me that might be more starved for time, with 4 children, has a very busy schedule, I need to outsource that. So I want to be able to order an end-to-end service to repair that treadmill, as an example. Or if I got time on a weekend, I might not want to use YouTube, but the ability, as you say, to use augmented reality to help me repair what I could use a tutorial on YouTube to repair in an hour. If I can use augmented reality, whether it be through glasses or just on my mobile device or a tablet, in order to repair that in 20 minutes versus an hour, that's fantastic. So offering the customer the ability to have their product serviced in whichever way they want, and flexibility to do that in an omni-channel way across whatever platform it is that I wish to leverage, depending upon my age, demographic, etc., and where I am in the world. What's better than to build a very loyal customer base across large swaths of people with different capabilities and desires? What could be better than that?
Yeah, and I think what's interesting in that example you give there as well, John, is it's the demographics aren't necessarily obvious on that as well, because if you were to take those 2 examples of a lady in her 70s and yourself, and say one's going to go out and fix it and one's not, well, actually, until you mentioned a bit about it being the time is your valuable commodity, the assumption may be, right, well, it's somebody that's older and perhaps wants the full service, etc. So companies need to kind of break through that kind of assumption of a demographic, I guess.
Sure.
It's interesting as well. I've been a fan of the way Caterpillar deliver service for a long time, and you've just pretty much described their model. They have 3 approaches. It's you can do it, and we'll give you the stuff. We can do it with you, or we'll do it for you. And one of the companies that was really kind of been a real driver in pushing these advanced services forward. So that's been their mantra for about 20, 30 years. Sure. But it's great that it's a really very succinct way of kind of viewing service. And I think service does need to be viewed as multi-tiered these days, to have these various different solutions that fit the right needs of the right customer.
Sure. If I want to buy your product, I'm going to buy it. And then to me, I feel very strongly, just like the example you mentioned with Caterpillar, I want to service that product in whichever way I wish to service it. Do not force me into a certain way to maintain that very expensive piece of equipment in a Caterpillar product example, or even down to a 250-pound mobile phone.
Yeah.
I've made that choice to buy your brand. I would strongly recommend that you allow me to have that service in whichever way that I see fit, whether it be on my own, with your company, or a third-party provider.
I mean, touching on that a little bit as well, and to kind of build out on that, this kind of flows neatly into this statistic here, I think, in terms of giving customers the opportunity to leverage the engineer when they're there, and also giving engineers the opportunity to cross-sell, upsell, etc. Just over half of companies, 54% of service companies, state that their technicians are not equipped to upsell to their customers or schedule additional services at a time of appointment. Now, when I'm in that scenario and I've got somebody around, I find that really incredibly frustrating, to be honest, to be told, oh yeah, you need to go on the website, or yeah, you phone this number. My natural reaction is like, you're here and I'm talking to you. We're having a human to human interaction. Go that extra mile for me. So I find it in the world that we exist in, where mobile is crikey, in countries like the UK, I think most people are on their fifth or sixth mobile device. I think there's complete mass ubiquity in terms of everyone having a mobile. It's been well integrated within field service for such a long time now, certainly seemingly a long time. I find that really surprising, John. I've got to be honest, that still over half of the companies don't have the ability to just plug their engineers into the CRM, or to plug their engineers into a parts and inventory management system where they can order perhaps these kind of things. I mean, is it maybe I've got too great expectations on the technology? Is it still a stumbling block for companies to kind of be able to do that from the mobile point of view? It goes back to that conversation about data, or what's your thoughts on it? Did you find that statistic kind of as surprising as I did, or is it a bit more based in reality, obviously being at the coalface dealing with it day in, day out?
Well, so am I very disappointed that we're not in a better place? But both, I'll take myself out of the working for a company that happens to provide solutions. I'll just put myself in the consumer box for a moment. It's incredibly disappointing, just like you, that and frustrating when somebody's not able to do that, right? So therefore, it's not really surprising to me, right? As a solution provider, it's surprising to me that more and more people haven't already adopted these. There aren't more early adopters. But again, like I mentioned previously, the fast followers, they're catching up. So I'm confident that the industry is going in the direction that I would like it to. Again, purely from a consumer standpoint. But I think that the shift actually is further than technology. I think it gets back to the change management and the focus group types of concepts to work with the field engineers. When you ask a field engineer who has never, quote unquote, sold, selling can be a very daunting word to someone who has never done it before. And let's face it, there's sometimes not such a great stereotype about selling. The salesperson, I can tell you a million cliches and jokes about the salesperson.
It's the big fat cigar, the dodgy raincoat. They're trying to sell you the greatest car that's ever been on his forecourt for a quarter of the price that it should be, but twice as much as you should be paying for.
Exactly. So just imagine the very subtle difference in words that one might choose to use with a field engineer of, do you want them to sell something or do you want them to delight a customer?
Yeah.
I think it would be just literally those few words, that differences. I think you would be many more field engineers or field technicians or whatever you want to refer to your mobile workforce as. Many more of them would be much more likely to adopt a solution that enables them to delight their customer versus selling the customer something, right? So hiring and training people with that mindset from the get-go is important, those customer ambassadors, but developing them in that same way is incredibly important, literally to use that term, delight a customer versus sell.
Yeah.
And I think those field engineers that are willing to delight a customer, or the bottom line is sell something, I think there has been an inherent lack of trust in the information they're getting from the various systems because they've learned not to trust it. I, as a field engineer a few years ago in lots of different manufacturers' organizations, might have misquoted a product because my price book wasn't up to date, or I didn't have the right part number because my full service life cycle system wasn't able to pull together the information accurately. I then quoted and sold the customer this certain product at this price, and it was wrong. And I'm then held accountable for it on the back end by my supervisor that wonders why I didn't do a good job, whereas it wasn't my fault. My technology didn't perform well.
Yeah.
Or I've got the right price, and dear Mr. and Mrs. Customer, the part can be here to you tomorrow. But my inventory system wasn't up to date, and I didn't have a real-time linkage into my parts, my stock control, and where that part is to know that I can in fact have it too. So again, then I'm dealing with a customer that's not happy because I was supposed to deliver the part tomorrow for the new install themselves, or for me to come back, and in fact had a 3-day lead time. So I think there's been a lot of mistrust built up with people as well, that we're relying on an unconnected service lifecycle system that required a lot of different integration points that are subject to failure, versus now where these companies, service providers, can adopt solutions like Astea offers that have that end-to-end service life cycle, fully integrated and interconnected, that have always got real-time information. Again, not data, but information that is provided to me, the field engineer, the customer ambassador, in a very easy-to-use way, so that I can delight the customer, and then I build trust.
Yeah. Well, this is it, and it's interesting because, again, it feels almost like this is one of those areas that in a couple of years' time we may be saying, well, we're pushing against that open door, because the connectivity, the insight and the ability to look at that parts inventory management, for example, hasn't been there and is now there and is fairly readily available. And then it's breaking past that fourth wall almost. It's breaking past that concept that we can't break our trusted advisor status of our engineers, both from the engineer perspective, but also from a management perspective. There's that viewpoint, and it's breaking down that viewpoint exactly as you said, very, very elegantly. It's exactly how we break down that view of selling, as in, it's hard sell, to actually know selling is a service. I don't want to be speaking to multiple people in a channel to get the various things I want. If an engineer comes round to me, and let's say in the print copy market, and he fixes my photocopier, and then I run out of toner for 2 days later for a different device, I'm going to be asking, well, why didn't he sort that out? And that's delighted me, is to sort that out. It's not an intrusive thing to say, well, Kris, you're going to run out of toner in 2 days or 2 weeks or whatever it is. Shall I order you some more? Because that's something that I'm going to be buying anyway.
Yeah, and then never minding I think I want to extend the topic I talked about before with building trust in that engineer. It's also building trust in that end customer.
Yeah.
So that when that engineer presents them with if that device, we're smart enough to tell that engineer in advance of servicing the copier, performing regular maintenance on the copier, that another copier or piece of imaging equipment in an office was about to run out of toner. I knew it in advance. And I can then, there is probably a certain inherent amount of distrust when that engineer might say to the office manager, oh, and by the way, you need to buy toner for that printer because it's going to run out of ink in 6 weeks. Well, is that engineer really just trying to sell me something I don't actually need for 6 more months? Or is it really, do I really need it replaced in 6 weeks? I want to give them an option. What an incredible capability it would be for that field engineer to show the office manager, yes, this is your average uses, and yes, in fact, that toner cartridge is going to run out in 6 weeks versus 6 months. It's up to you. You can place order with me now. I happen to have that in my van stock, and you can avoid a 5-pound shipping and handling charge. Or if you prefer to wait for 6 more weeks when it's going to run out, that's fine too. It's your choice.
Yeah, but it's that transparency that the data allows, which kind of, again, it's why I feel that this is an area that will open up quite dramatically. I just feel that the companies, it's interesting because the companies that have trialed this, there are a few companies that kind of tried crossing the engineer and sales rep role, and I think it's like anything that's early, it's been a little bit clumsily done, but I think the technology and the data essentially is what's going to allow us to do that, because it becomes such a transparent conversation that transparency dispels distrust.
Sure.
On that kind of point as well, talking about empowering the engineers, overwhelmingly, and I kind of touched on this, it's pretty much completely prevalent now across most markets as well. It's not just a kind of US or EMEA thing. It seems to be most markets that we touch, certainly. We're seeing the proclivity towards mobile being overwhelmingly prevalent, and we're seeing it in this stat here. 89% of field service companies state their technicians currently use mobile devices to record data about service appointments as part of their regular process. I mean, are you surprised that there's still 11% of companies that aren't doing this, John? I mean, that seems to be the crazy thing there. But to touch a little bit back on what I was saying earlier, where I was talking about the importance of IoT and it often being compared to mobile. Do you think that mobile's changed field service more than any other technology to date? And I know there's, as I mentioned, I put forward a case for IoT earlier, but there's a lot of arguments, very strong arguments, that mobile completely revolutionised field service. What's your thoughts?
I think it's been, it's hard for me to say what's been the single biggest driving force, but I think it's definitely top 2 or 3 as a driving force. But I think it's also important to realize that it's just, maybe stating the obvious, but it's simply the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
So let's use an example of, quote unquote, recording data on a mobile device. And I want to continue to use that distinction between data and information.
Yes.
So if I can just merely record data in a mobile device, and that data gets communicated to some central repository or an individual at some point in time, well, it matters big time of what that point in time is. So am I recording data that gets communicated at the end of the day after it's too late for someone to intervene and do something about it, or am I communicating that data in real time? Right. Again, stating the obvious, real time, provided that you can convert the data into information that allows actionable insights to be acted upon in real time or near real time or intraday, is incredibly important.
Yeah.
Right. So yes, there has been a large level of adoption in these mobile devices, but that type of thing is a great example of where I think a lot of organizations still have a huge opportunity to improve, upgrade their existing systems they may have in place, or maintain the mobile devices they might have in place and replace them with an even stronger software as a service platform that does enable them to take the data points and convert them to information in real time to allow somebody, whether it be a field supervisor or a back office worker, to intervene and improve a situation at that point in time. To take St. Peter the plumber, and instead of taking St. Peter the plumber to go from John's mom's house to a job 30 miles away, to potentially send that St. Peter the plumber to a job at 10 miles away because I've got to hit a certain SLA with the consumer that's got a preventive maintenance plan. I'm going to miss it. And there was an accident on a motorway that prevented the originally scheduled technician to get there. Right? I think that's very important. And I think that tip of the iceberg and taking that very important piece of all those pieces of data, converting them into information, and then allowing them to be used across the entire service life cycle is incredibly important, so that I can not only get that field engineer to the right place at the right time, but I can get that part to the right place at the right time, and I can dispatch it, and many times with very little human intervention. I think it's an incredibly important piece of the puzzle that a lot of people might overlook when they say, well, I've got a mobilized field force that's enabled with mobile devices today. It's good enough as part of my digital transformation. But really taking a look under the covers to find out, okay, what are you doing with that? And how frequently are you able to update that data and do something with it? Which is where an embedded business intelligence solution really comes to the fore, enabling executive management or dispatch center scheduling management or field supervisors to take a look at that information and make medium to long-term planning decisions associated with it, to take a certain group of technicians or engineers or an individual engineer and improve and help them hit the top quartile of what their peer group is able to achieve, but also make that all-important intraday decision that can impact many customers. Because once you mess up one service delivery in the chain of a part or a person, you've negatively impacted the entire day.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's that domino effect, isn't it, where one will spiral out. I mean, just to kind of push you on that a little bit, How do companies make that choice when to look under the covers, to use that analogy? Because obviously there's that balance, isn't there, between always wanting the best that's available, and being able to eke out those, in field service, that 1% can yield huge differences in revenue. But then there's the balance, and you've touched on it a few times, of things like data security, mobile device management, for example. If you're going to roll out a new kind of upgrade on the mobile app, how do companies strike that balance? Is it something that they should be under continuous review? Is it, the hardware guys would always say, well, you need at least 3 years for a device, especially the enterprise hardware guys. 3 years to 7 years is what they push for. Obviously, they've got benefits in that. How do you approach that?
I think that it's very important for these organizations to have a cross-functional group of people that are in information systems or information technology or whatever it is they want to refer to them as nowadays. The product development group that's developing the product to begin with and generating demand from the customers.
Yeah.
And operations, those ones that are responsible for delivering the after sales service during the extra mile. Getting a cross-functional group of people to assess their current state and benchmark against their competitors to understand what their competitors are able to do and how are they able to benchmark that. Well, in many ways, there's a lot of information out there available through organizations such as yourselves or other third-party organizations to get that benchmarking data. And there's also the ability to get the benchmarking data from trusted advisors, just as Astea, that have hundreds of customers in their line of work and 40 years of experience that can bring to bear, this is the comparative data, and this is where your peer group is. You're in the top quartile or the bottom quartile, and here's why, and here's some opportunities for you to improve in whatever aspect of that service lifecycle they can. Working with trusted advisors like us is an incredibly important part of the equation. If you've got those experts out there, the ability to phone a friend, why not do it and take advantage of that?
Okay, John, so we've covered a fair bit of ground today, and it's been really interesting. I think pulled out some great insight across the conversation. To wrap up, I just wanted to take a look at perhaps the one last graph, and again, it's one that's kind of echoes some of the conversation we've been having here, and it really is a really fascinating one for me. What percentage of installed assets are IoT enabled? So we've talked about IoT being the future. We've talked about the importance of connected service. We've talked about the importance of preventative maintenance and the shift towards advanced services and servitization. I think this is the one that gives us the real indication of how rapidly that's progressing. One statistic that isn't on this slide is that 0% of the companies that responded had all of their assets IoT enabled. So we're not in the brave new world quite as yet. But what we do see is we see 17% have no assets enabled. So just under less than a fifth of companies now, or the flip side of that, 4/5 of companies have embraced IoT on some level. The biggest percentage of companies there is the 38% of companies have up to, or just under a quarter, up to 24% of their assets enabled. Another big chunk in the middle there, 30% of companies have just under half. So, I mean, really we're looking at over 2/3 of the companies that were in this response set, for sure, have had at least, a sizable amount of assets connected. So we are seeing that kind of chunk moving forward. And there's that, perhaps those early adopters that we were talking about earlier, up to 75% or 74% rather. 14% of companies have up to 3/4 of their assets enabled. I thought this was really interesting. I think it's the two in the middle that leapt out to me. I think I would have anticipated seeing perhaps fewer in there and more towards certainly as well, perhaps more towards that smaller bracket of 38%, perhaps more in that 17% of not having any assets connected. I think the fact that we're seeing those two central kind of columns there, that's quite an indicator that we have moved quite rapidly into companies adopting IoT. One thing I wanted to discuss with you, John, is this indicative of companies taking a phased or an iterative approach to IoT? Something that we often talk about is it's kind of it's very hard, especially with larger companies or even medium-sized organisations, to go out and retrofit all their assets. So it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not something that we can boil the ocean on. I think that we will see it as an iterative process. But what's your thoughts on that? And how does that data look to you in terms of the trends that you're seeing there?
I suppose it's about where I would expect it to be. It is a little bit surprising to see the 17% of the none.
Yeah.
And I go back to the combination of not where we are today in 2018, but where we have been for the last 5 years, and the bandwidth, which is now very different, the security, and the cost and the quality. So those three, if those were trains all merging at a certain junction, it hasn't been too far in the distant past when those things merged. That said, it's still a little bit surprising to see that 17%. And I think that as more and more companies realize the true return on investment is around that customer experience and making it personalized and predictive, to focus on those two P's. If it's personalized and predictive, it's typically going to provide me with a loyal customer, or help me build more loyal customers and nurture the loyal customers I have, and build more raving fans and nurture the raving fans that I have. Personalized and predictive, and then taking the data that's always been available in IoT and converting it into information across lots of different platforms, and then putting that back into my full service lifecycle to enable me to take actionable insights from that information and even guide me towards recommendations to make that 1% margin improvement on my service offering, or that 1% improvement in delighting the customer, also known as selling the customer incremental products or services, because I've been able to understand what else is happening in their home or in their office that might be impacted while I'm there. I think those will move the needle, and I think you'll see a lot more folks move into the 25 to 49%.
Yeah.
And I think you also see the 50 to 74% category increase. I'm not quite sure we're ever going to get to 100%, because not every device out there, by being connected, does provide personalized and predictive. There is a tipping point of where it makes sense to make the investment, obviously, regardless of how small cost might be.
Do you think, to reflect on something you were saying a little bit earlier about the organisations, perhaps larger organisations that have acquired a couple of different smaller organisations, and then we get this two different IoT protocols. The parallel for me that always sticks in my head, which is perhaps a bit oversimplified, is VHS versus Betamax. Do you think that might be one thing that will really accelerate IoT adoption, is when we get the solid platform? You know, again, it's DVD versus HD CD. If you remember, gosh, I'm aging myself there by saying that.
Well,
but
less so than beta to VHS.
Yeah, this is true, actually. Yeah, it's very true. Very, very true. I just think I'm one of the only people on the planet that remembers high def CDs. But yeah, do you think that that's one of the things that's going to push this forward? Is that acceptance of a kind of a global protocol, basically a universal protocol?
I think it could. I think it's going to be, there are many standards bodies across lots of different types of technology solutions that have tried to implement global standards, and it hasn't worked. I think the more important place for technology providers to focus is, this is my personal feeling.
Yeah, of course.
I think the more important place to focus is taking that data from multiple sources and go back to it, turning it into information regardless of the source of the data. I think that will be a shorter path than a universal protocol for Internet of Things, especially in today's, as we know, unfortunately, incredibly volatile global economy with many different trade agreements that will, unfortunately or fortunately, depending upon which side of the equation you fall, not to make this a political discussion, but that volatility in the global markets and various trade agreements that are underway, I think will disable things like universal standards and things like that, and it will be up to different regions and companies within those regions to standardize where possible, but it will be up to companies like Astea and others to take that information, regardless of where it comes from or what format it is, and as easily as possible convert it into information that is usable in a consistent way, regardless of where it comes from. Yeah, there's a saying the U.S. Marines have: "Good today is better than perfect tomorrow."
Yeah.
And I think the good today, better than perfect tomorrow applies in this sense that a perfect tomorrow of a universal protocol, that will be tomorrow. So good today, I think, is going to need to be you got to have companies like Astea that are able to read it and do something with it.
Yeah.
And consolidate it from lots of different sources.
One final one then, John. I'm just going to put your neck on the line. And what's the time frame, do you think? Good today. How long is today?
Gosh, I don't know. I see statistics like this, and I take statistics like this, and I compare it anecdotally to the types of opportunities that we're working on with our existing customers and our prospective customers. And I think we're several years away from it. So several to me means 3. So I think by 2021, 2022, we're there in this. I think we're already there in a lot of ways in this good today world, where companies like us can do that type of thing. And I think as we see more and more companies in the IoT platform world bear that in mind, that approach, I think that's where we'll be. I think in those few years we'll be there. And I think the pull from especially the manufacturing world, which is a huge segment, obviously, in the service world, I think that pull and that demand, and they're willing to invest in those solutions, that will be the tipping point. There's nothing more important to organizations than building things, not only manufacture building things that people want, but as software providers and technology providers that serve those manufacturers, building things they want, they will invest in and spend money on. That will drive it.
Yeah, perfect. Well, John, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you for sharing the data with us. We've got links below to Astea. If anyone wanted to follow yourself and keep up to date with yourself, is there a follow the main Astea Twitter handles or anything that we should point them towards? Or
absolutely, yeah. Follow the main Astea Twitter handles, and then of course I'm on LinkedIn.
Yes.
So be happy to have a few more followers there and interact with people on LinkedIn. And thanks a lot, Kris. I really enjoyed the chat today.
Perfect. And just for everybody that's downloaded and is viewing this, thanks ever so much for taking the time, and we shall see you all soon. Take care.